Tissues. Reading glasses, check. iPad with very big letters, check. That wasn't so bad. I think the Divinagracia women are going to take care of business right now. When it comes to talking,
last time I stood up here in this spot was a memorial service for my brother in June of 2013. And it was a time of distress and a time of panic. And I was so mad at him, and I was saddened, and I was distressed for my parents because I honestly didn't know how they were going to survive it. Today is a little bit different. I feel like we've had the gift of time to prepare. But can anyone ever truly be prepared? Today we gather to acknowledge and mourn and reminisce and celebrate the simple but magnificent life of my mother, Sabrina Galvez Divinagracia. As many of you know, mother and daughter relationships are complicated by nature. Right, Divinagracia? For my mother and me, this complicated relationship was epic. We were as different as night and day. For my challenging teenage years, which kind of started at age 2 when I could actually speak, to most of my adult life, I would always ask my mother how on earth could we possibly be related. We had an ongoing family joke, a banter between my father, my mother, and me, where I would say, you guys must have kidnapped me from some other family, hopefully a rich family. And somewhere there's a suitcase full of cash and a collection of diamond tiaras. My parents would look at each other and just start laughing. Their comeback was, one dark, rainy night, we heard some pitiful crying from a box. And we looked to see what the racket was about, and there you were. And I said, no, your memory's off. And they said, no, actually, our memory is off. We found you in a garbage can. Growing up, I've always regarded myself as my father's daughter. From a very early age, I had very concrete ideas about hair and makeup and clothes and fashion and style and aesthetics. And I strived to be something. I didn't know what. I just thought my mother was striving to be a nun. I worked many hours, many jobs as a kid to supplement my wardrobe choices. And my mother was perfectly content wearing the same clothes over and over again. My dad and I were the consumers, and my mother was the consummate saver. We often joked that my mother would only shop if the sale was 100% off. To which she strongly agreed. As a child, I would look at my mother sideways. And as an adult, I realized that my mother was not at all concerned with superficial things that are fleeting. At every occasion, birthdays, Christmas, anniversaries, we would ask, what do you want? Nothing. I don't need anything. Just save your money. Year after year, decade after decade, she was the complete opposite of my father. My father had a long list. My mother was not defined by labels or lack thereof. Not that she wasn't happy for other people who were doing well. She was the first to compliment people on their beautiful homes, or cars, or clothes, or jewelry. She never judged, but ownership and more things were simply not a priority for her. Her elegance and her beauty was in her simplicity. Her top priority was her faith in God and in things that do not fade. My mother talked the talk, but most importantly, she walked the walk. If we were involved in any potluck event, you could always count on my mother to volunteer to bring paper plates, napkins, forks, bottles of soda. And I'd say, "You're not making anything?" And she'd say, "Nah, Tita Rose, she's got it. Tita Mila, she's got it. You and Cynthia, they're so good at that." And she would say, "Oh, we all need to eat on paper plates." Ding! She was low maintenance and low stress, or my mother's middle name. As an adult and looking back at those earlier times in retrospect, I believe she wanted those who enjoy the art of cooking and the art of entertaining to be front and center, and she was perfectly fine to assist wherever she was needed. My mother was a team player. Her gifts were not lost on those around her. She and my father acted like tribal council leaders to many friends and members of our family during times of trouble. They knew that my mother, with her low-key, non-judgmental approach, could be trusted with their deepest secrets, and in confidence, she could wholeheartedly be counted on to take their secret to the grave. My own friends would often say, "We have the best parents in the world." And I would say, "Really?" As a child, I was too caught up in my own limited world to see what was obvious right before my eyes. I had amazing parents. Growing up, I didn't know much about my mother's history. I suspected that it wasn't a very happy childhood. She never talked much about it. From bits and pieces that I've heard from my brother, was much more interested and informed about our family history. My mother's mother died when she was quite young. I believe my father just told me the other night her mom died when she was only 2, giving birth to her younger sister. And being the eldest of 2 sisters and many step-siblings, she stepped into the role of their mother. As a kid, I had 2 loving and supportive parents, a secure home, and the luxury of enjoying every bit of my childhood. As a child, my mother was cooking and cleaning and raising her younger brothers and sisters and caring for her grandmother and her father. And as a teenager, I always kind of wished I had a certain kind of mom, the kind that would take me shopping and talk boy stuff with me. She didn't know. How could she? She didn't have a mother herself. All I know is that she did the best that she could. The gift my mother gave me growing up was free reign to be who I needed to be, even if it meant having a willful daughter who baffled her with every headbutting experience, back talk, and a lot of eye rolling. Her favorite thing to say to me was, "I have turned you over to Jesus." And apparently, I needed divine intervention. And I grew up craving my parents' approval. Every major decision I've ever made, I always thought, what would my parents think? In one hand, I can count the exact moments that my mother, in particular, said to me that she was proud of me. She told me on my wedding day that she was proud of me. And I said, "Really?" She said, "Yeah, because you're marrying the best person that you have ever met." Most would say you'll marry someone like your father. And I think the only thing my dad and my husband have in common is they're both attorneys. I'm just kidding. On the one hand, my mother and my husband were completely simpatico. When I described my husband at our 20th anniversary party, I could have easily been describing qualities about my mother. They possess a quiet strength and unshakable integrity. They're unpretentious, supportive, compassionate, low-key, and most importantly, they're both low maintenance. And despite my shortcomings and crazy shenanigans, they love me unconditionally. I realized then, oh my God, I married my mother. Isn't it weird that I've always felt that she and I had no connection? As her days were drawing closer to the end, I was feeling anxiety, and I haven't done enough as a daughter to make my mother proud. During many sleepless nights, I thought back at the times when I remembered my mother at her happiest. I only had to think back to the days that her 2 grandchildren my sons Chasen and Tennyson were born. She held them gazing at their faces for a very long time, looking for familiarity in their newborn faces, to recognize families that have come before her. These boys instantly became part of her DNA. Watching her, watching them, made me believe in love at first sight. Post-birth for both kids, she stayed with us for an extended period of time, even though we had help. It was a few times she was willing to part from my father. He had to go back to work and she wanted to stay despite the fact that we had help. I often caught her staring at Chasen and then after Tennyson while they were infants, sleeping, smelling their delicious baby smell, and singing to them, and having them sleep in our arms. First time I saw my mother really dance, I was walking by her room, and she and Chasen, without any music, were listening to some music just in her heart, and they were just dancing away in the room. And this is one of the most beautiful memories I often draw upon when I'm stressed. The image of my mother dancing with complete abandon with my 1-year-old son, to silent music that they only heard with their hearts. And Tennyson, when he was born, he had a congenital heart defect that started his life, first 11 days of life, in critical care at the NICU. And my mother prayed to God like she had never prayed before. And believe me, my mother was a queen of praying. But this was prayer on steroids.
Tennyson was her special baby. And she said he looked just like her brother and her father. She kept saying, "Take me, Lord, this baby needs to be with his mother. And that this mother needs to be with this baby." While this prayer has been uttered by millions of others in times of turmoil, I didn't have a single doubt that my mother would have gladly given her life for either of my children. My kids are so lucky to have had the love and profound memories of 4 grandparents, Grandpa Richard and Nai, who have passed, and Grandma Jane and Tai Tai, with whom we're so fortunate to still have here.
I guess it's been 10 years, I thought it was 7. I insisted that my mother and my brother take my mother to a doctor because we noticed that her memory was starting to fail. And while at the doctor's office, my brother calls me up and he says, "You better sit down." He says, "How old do you think Nina is?" I said, "I don't know. I think at the time my father had just turned 70 or something." I said, "I don't know, 70, 71 maybe." Brace yourself, because here comes the Filipino soap opera parts. My mother was 11 years older than my dad, and they have kept this a lifelong secret, like Mission Impossible with all of their friends, and we never knew. My mother kept her skin pristine by staying out of the sun, and we used to joke that she was part vampire because her teeth were so white, and she just looked like she never aged, and that's really true. I realized that they were the original Demi and Ashton. So scandalous. And I also realized my mother was a cougar. Good for her. We first realized that my mother's single remaining kidney was in trouble last July when she fainted at the LA Zoo when she and my dad took my boys there for the day. By September, decisions had to be made as to whether she could tolerate dialysis or not. To make a long story short, with her dementia and age, her own doctor advised against it, and I asked my parents to leave the room after one of the appointments so I could ask the doctor, "How long do we have if we don't do dialysis?" And she said 3 months, maybe 6 months tops. But if she fell, if she got pneumonia or got an infection, all bets are off. I was shocked. It just seemed improbable. Though her short-term memory was shot, she still remembered critical things and could get around much better than my dad. Though I had been preparing myself for years now for this inevitable stage of the game, it was still hard to believe at the time. It was coming. I wanted to help my dad prepare too, but I simply could not tell him. I couldn't get the words out, but we may only have 3 months left with her. So I begged both of my parents to come live with us in LA so I could help care for her. And they said no. I suspect that they thought it was an imposition, especially on my husband. Did they know Lauren's way more Filipino than I am? He was completely on board with whatever we needed to do. But they wanted to stay in their own home, and my brother took the role of caring for my parents very seriously. He had schedules, he had charts, but I had ahos. I had the grandkids. And I wanted my parents around them as much as possible. I wanted to help care for her, and my brother wanted to care for her. And do you know an easy way to know that you did a good job as a parent? It's when your children want you around. You know you did a great job when your children are fighting over who's going to care for you. My parents stayed with us from Halloween until November so we could celebrate her 88th birthday. And that day, despite the fact that her plummeting numbers were going down, my mother looked amazing. It was the last of the many makeovers I gave her that she would endure. With just a little makeup and curling her hair, my mother looked radiant and beautiful for her birthday dinner, and she didn't seem sick at all. She has always been a natural beauty, and I thought, what a relief. She's going to go the distance. I can relax and stop worrying for a while. On her way home from Thanksgiving vacation, I had received news that my mother had fallen. When Phil, my cousin, sent me a picture, I had to erase it immediately because she looked like she was hit by a truck. I started my campaign immediately to move my parents down south. And they said, well, we'll come down for the holidays, but we're going to go back to the Bay Area after. My parents finally got to our house in LA on December 22nd. And I was shocked that my mother couldn't walk by herself to her front door. It took the both of us, Lauren and me, to walk her in. I was relieved that I had set my formal dining room as an additional downstairs bedroom for them, so she wouldn't have to deal with stairs. From day to day, my mother's condition got worse and worse until finally everything had to be done for her. Selfishly, I felt relieved that they were with me. I wanted a chance to somehow repay her for once, for giving me life, for raising a strong, stubborn, strong-willed daughter that although she didn't understand, she loved unconditionally anyway. How could I possibly ever do enough? It was a gift to myself, and it was a privilege to have been the one to care for her the last weeks of her life. I knew that with my mother's extreme modesty, she would not have been comfortable having a stranger help her with such intimate care. She wouldn't have even been comfortable having my dad help her with such things. It wasn't only my duty as her daughter, but it was a privilege and a gift to have been able to do that for her. A week after they arrived, my father, who's always been sort of cool, above surface, had told Irma, our housekeeper, our nanny, that Nana was already having conversations with Terry, my brother who had passed, her father, and my tatai's mother, her mother-in-law, both who have been dead for over 45 years. Panic was starting to set inside me. I just went into full-time nurse mode. 2 days before my mother passed, I was on the bed, cleaning her, putting lotion on her legs.
And when I looked up, I actually saw my brother's face. I went in the kitchen and I told Lauren, I just saw my brother, and he said, you know, I always thought your brother looked like your mom. And I said, no, I didn't say my mother looks like my brother. I said, I saw my brother's face. About 20 minutes later, Nina and Cynthia was in the room with us, and in the middle of our conversation, she said, I just saw Terry right now. When I looked at your mom's face, I almost fell off the bed. I said, I just told Lauren the same thing not even a half hour ago. That day, the dogs were extra restless. They just acted agitated. They got extra walks, but they just weren't their normal selves. I thought, you know, Terry is here. We inherited Terry's 2 Datsuns, Nissan and Pickles, when he had died. And that day in particular, they felt him. Terry was here, knowing she was getting ready. My mother was just waiting for my brother to come. Once Manu arrived, she was ready. Tita Rose, Nina and Cynthia, Liza, Maritas, the female warriors in my life were there to help guide her through. And in the 2 days preceding her passing, her breathing went from intermittent pauses like apnea to a gurgling sound as though she had fluid stuck in her throat. It was extremely difficult for my father to see her like that, despite what the hospice nurses were saying. She wasn't experiencing pain. Her body's just shutting down. But just to be on the safe side, I was administering liquid morphine about every 2 hours to ensure she was feeling no pain. No matter what time I came downstairs, my father was up. My suspicion is that he sat vigil in the middle of the night to make sure he didn't miss the moment. He wanted to be with her until her dying breath. He kept reassuring her, it's okay to rest now, dear. You have nothing to worry about. You've taken care of all of us. And it's okay if you're ready to go. It was beautiful and heartbreaking at the same time. If you look at the picture of the hands in your program, I took that picture in the middle of the night. My father was sitting up, awake, slightly incoherent, but still holding Nanai's hand, till death do us part. Through the night, my father stayed by her side, and I set my alarm to check in at 2, at 4, and at 6 a.m. Finally, at 7:30, it was my turn, so I climbed in bed with her, with music that I made, with a playlist of Filipino love songs mixed with church music. Her breathing was so much more relaxed than the 2 previous days. There was no gurgling, no long, strenuous pauses. She was just sleeping peacefully. An hour later, my brother came into the room, and just like siblings, we have a little argument. And so I left to make my dad some breakfast. At 9:15 a.m., my brother called me to come in and help him. When I walked in my dining room, which has these plantation shutters closed all the way, and we were controlling the light with just the chandeliers, I noticed that one ray of sunshine was coming from the top corner and hitting my mother right on the cheek. And I actually thought to myself, this is like a computer-generated image of someone being called up to heaven. The light coming down is what caused my brother to look up. I think he was on Facebook or sending email, giving people updates. And because we always joked that my mother was part vampire, he wanted me to help move her. The last few days of her life, I noticed that the tiniest little bit of movement would hurt her because she would have this pain on her face. And so every time I would clean her, I would always apologize. No, I'm sorry, it's only going to take 2 minutes, so I'll go as fast as I can. And just before I moved my mom to get her face out of the sunlight, I realized that her breath was just coming to a nice, gentle close. And that's when I called the kids and my dad and my husband to climb in bed with us and be there. And my mom took her last breath. I couldn't even hear any breathing or find a pulse. And I just stuck my hand under her shirt over her heart. And I was able to feel the very last beats of her heart until there was no more. And this has really given me comfort in the weeks since, that everybody that loved her was there, was able to tell her what we felt. There were no words left unsaid. And isn't that all we can hope for in this life? That at the end, no matter what you do, no matter what you have, that you have people that are there to hold your hand, and people that you love on the other side to help guide you. My parents would have celebrated their 52nd wedding anniversary this May, and they had a lifelong love affair that most of us only dream about. I always told people, do you know how rare it is to not only still be in love after 5 decades, but to still really like each other? My parents were glued at the hip, and we often found them sitting on the couch watching CNN and still holding hands. Not only were they lifelong partners, they were each other's best friends. In closing, I want to say thank you to my brother. I was very selfish with Nana and Tatai's time, not only because I realized that as we got older, time with them became so much more short and precious, but because I want my boys, our boys, to have Nana etched in their memory so she can be a part of them throughout their lives. Everywhere they go and whatever they do, I want a piece of her to stay with them. So thank you for being such a meticulous son and for taking such good care of both of them. I could only be so lucky that someday my own sons would love me that much. And that way, you and Nana achieved what most people only dream about: a wonderful marriage that lasted a lifetime, a partnership, a friendship, and a companionship that was at its very finest. You two had so many inside jokes about oil of Olay. No matter how many times you told the same jokes over and over, you never failed to make Nana laugh. Laughter and joy were the soundtracks of your marriage. But the biggest and most unsuspected surprise was how you turned out through it all. It never occurred to me that you could be this devoted, steadfast, patient, gentle, loving husband and caretaker that you have become. I was utterly moved by your patience and kindness through Nana's Alzheimer's condition for years, and for your tenderness and strength to be by Nana's side to the very end. I truly believed that aside from the short-term memory loss, my mother never exhibited the typical Alzheimer's presentation, because you made such a point to bring her everywhere, and in her final days, you filled it with joy and laughter. I know that you're feeling a great deal of anxiety and guilt for not having done enough. But the truth is, and Nana would often say, as Larry also said, less is more. It was your selfless love that allowed Nani to go home to her Heavenly Father, where she is whole. And she's perfect again. It would have been easier on our conscience to try everything to hold on to what was, to try more, to do more. But it's both love and sacrifice to set someone free. Free from pain and hardship of an imperfect body. She was so at peace, and she was so ready, and it was her time. And you'll also find peace in the decisions you've made. I want to thank you for showing us what true love is. And not I would want you to take care of yourself because your boys need you. We need you. You need to be around for a long time because I just don't have it in me to do another one of these eulogies. And to my mother, Nanai, how could I ever thank you for giving me life, for loving my boys, for supporting my decisions, for disciplining me, for praying for me, for believing in me, when I didn't even know who I was. Not only am I my father's daughter, I'm proud to say that I'm also my mother's daughter, and I hope that I've made you proud. I love you. I will miss you. I will dream of you. And I will look for you in the faces of my own grandchildren. You'll always be a part of us, as we are a part of you. Thank you for everything.